Hello and welcome to the biggest and most complete project of the course. And this is kind of the final project of this course, which brings everything that we have learned up until this point into one big and beautiful project. And so just like with the MapT project before, let's actually start by taking a look at this project. And this is it. So this is the Forkify application that we will build together over the next couple of hours. So this application is all about searching for recipes and displaying them here in our user interface. And in order to get a good idea of how this application actually works, you should probably follow along this demonstration by going to this URL. So Forkify v2.netlify.app. And so let's start for pizza here. And so you see that right away here on this left sidebar, we get all of these results. And when we have more than 10 results, they actually get divided up on multiple pages. So we have this nice pagination here, which is a very common feature of web applications, right? So you've seen this all the time probably. And so now in this project, you will learn how to implement this yourself. Okay. And now let's actually click on one of these recipes, and you see that then it shows up here on the right side. So we have the cooking time, the servings, all the ingredients, and then also a link to the page where the recipe actually comes from. Now here in the servings, we can actually decrease or also increase the number of servings. And as you see down here, the ingredients will then automatically get updated. Right? Then another cool thing that we can do is to bookmark recipes. So as we click here, then that button changes, and we also got that recipe bookmark here in this nice panel now. And here you see I already had a bookmark before, and as we click that, it will then of course move to that one. Now if we click here again, then that will basically unbookmark the recipe. And so you see that now it's gone. And let's do the same here. And so now it's empty. And we get this kind of warning message instead. All right. Now finally, we can actually also add recipes. So just click on this button. And then here we can just fill in this form. Now in this demo version, that's actually not going to work because that would very quickly clutter this entire application here. Now, what's special about this recipe upload is that all the recipes that you upload yourself will only be visible for yourself. So here, for example, I have this JS pizza, which was done by me. And so therefore it has this icon here and also this icon here. So it means that it was the user itself. Now, when you open up this page and search for pizza, then this recipe here should probably also appear for yourself, but that's only because this version has like a fixed developer API key. And so each recipe is associated to a certain developer key. And we will see what that means by the end of this section when we actually implement this. All right. But I think that's actually it. So that's the whole functionality of the Forkify application, which seems pretty simple, but it will actually be a lot of work to implement all of this. And so hopefully it's going to be a great learning experience for you. And once again, I tried to design this application like as modern and beautiful as possible so that you end up with a real nice application in your portfolio in the end. Okay. But with all that being said, let's now actually go plan this application. So now that we know what the project looks like and also how it works, we need to go through the same planning steps that we did in the MapT project. Now in this case, we will actually leave the architecture for a bit later and only talk about the user stories, features, and also about the flowchart for now. And to start, remember that a user story is a description of the application's functionality from a user's perspective. So basically, when we write user stories, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of our users. Now, all the user stories put together will then provide a clear picture of how the whole application is going to work. And so based on these stories, we will then be able to implement all our application features. All right, so let's say that we are now kind of the project manager for Forkify, and let's also pretend that we didn't see the final version of the project yet, because of course we have to write user stories usually before we implement the project, right? But in this case, since we're kind of doing it together here in this video, of course it's better when we already know what the application looks like. But in the real world, this is basically going to be your starting point. So for this project, the first user story could be, as a user, I want to search for recipes so that I can find new ideas for meals. And so you see, again, we are using the format of as a type of user, I want to, and then an action, so that, and then a benefit. So here the user wants to search for recipes so that they can find new ideas for meals. Then next up, the next user story is, as a user, I want to be able to update the number of servings so that I can cook a meal for different number of people. And that, of course, makes a lot of sense in any application of this kind. Then next, as a user, I want to bookmark recipes so that I can review them later. And again, this really makes sense in any kind of real-world application like this. Then, as a user, I want to be able to create my own recipes so that I can have all my recipes organized in the same application. And finally, as a user, I want to be able to see my bookmarks and my own recipes when I leave the application and come back later. And so this way I can close the application safely after cooking. All right, and once again, let's kind of pretend that we came up with all these user stories while kind of brainstorming for this application. And so now we can use all these user stories for our next step and come up with the features that we need in the application. So first, the user wants to search for recipes. And so therefore, our application should have a search functionality, which is basically an input field which will send requests to an API with the searched keywords. Then the application should of course display these results, and also with pagination to make it more user-friendly in case that there are many results. And then of course the application needs to display the selected recipe with relevant data such as cooking time, servings, and ingredients. Now the next user story is pretty simple, so all we need is a functionality to change the servings. So basically updating all ingredients according to the current number of servings. Then in order to bookmark recipes, we simply need a functionality for that. So basically allowing users to bookmark the recipe and then display a list of all of them somewhere on the page. Then for the next user story, what we need is basically a feature that allows users to upload their own recipes, which should then automatically get bookmarked so that the user can easily find all of their own recipes. Now, what's important here is that each user can only see their own recipes, but not the recipes from other users. And we could go ahead and implement this in a very complex way, like, for example, creating user accounts, but we will keep it very simple and basically simply associate uploaded recipes to an API key. And again, we will see by the end of the section how that is going to work. Now, finally, we are going to need a feature that will store bookmark data in the browser using local storage. And that we already did before, and so this part is going to be fairly simple. Then to finish, whenever the page loads, we need to then read all the saved bookmarks and display them somewhere on the page. Great. And with this, we now know exactly what we need to implement. But now let's take this list of unstructured features and actually put it into a nice structured flowchart, which will allow us to plan how exactly the application is actually going to work. So we're going to start only with these first 3 features in order to keep it simple now and not overwhelm you right from the start. So we're going to build this flowchart in 3 parts, and now starting with these 3 features. And as always, we're going to focus on events, and the first event in our web application should probably be the user searching for a recipe. And so that's our feature number 1, basically. So when a user searches for a certain recipe, then we need to asynchronously load the search results from our API. And so, of course, that happens asynchronously. And then once the results are in, we will simply render them in our application. However, we will not render all the search results right away because that would be overwhelming. And so instead, we also render some pagination buttons in order to hide basically part of the search results on different pages. So that makes sense, right? And then as the user clicks one of the pagination buttons, it will then render the search results for the new page that was selected, basically. And it will also render new pagination buttons. So for example, when we're on page 2, then there will be a button to go back to page 1 and a button to go to page 3. But when we're on page 3, then the button to go back will point to page 2 and the button to go forward will point to page 4. And so we need to re-render these buttons basically every time that the user clicks on one of them, right? Then finally, we also need the logic to actually display the recipe. So when the user selects a recipe, then we need to asynchronously load all the recipe data from the API, and then once the data arrived, we render the recipe to the user interface. And we will actually also do the same whenever the page loads with a recipe ID in the URL. So I think I showed you that in the beginning of this video. So whenever we click on a recipe, then the URL will change with the recipe ID. Remember that? And so it's important that, for example, if we take that URL and copy it and paste it, for example, to another browser, that then the recipe corresponding to that ID should also load right away. And so that's why here in this flowchart, I have the load recipe on both events. So when the user selects a recipe from the user interface, or also when the page loads with a recipe ID already in the URL. All right, and that's actually it for part 1 of the flowchart. And in fact, these are basically already our core features. So the most important features of the application. So searching for recipes, rendering search results, and then also rendering the individual recipe that was selected. And so all this will probably take us half of the section to implement. So there really is a lot to do. Now we will start implementing the project only with the recipe displaying. So only feature number 3, which is basically this right part of the flowchart. And this will allow us to start implementing some functionality and also play around with the application a little bit, but still without thinking about the architecture. And so without the rigid structure that might be imposed by the architecture. Great. So with this, we basically have this part of the application planned. And so let's now finally get to work.